Welcome to Good Service. We are your hosts, Ben Chung.
And Kevin's Ha.
Each week we'll be breaking bread and having real, raw, and vulnerable talks about life, faith, and everything in between, and always over a fire meal.
Thanks for joining our table today. Let's eat.
Folks, welcome back to another episode of Good Service. We are your hosts, Ben.
And Kevin.
And we're just actually continuing on our episode with Andrea Chung, but this time she is joined by her husband,
gang,
co-pastor, co-lead, a beloved church. We got Will Chung and Andrea Chung, power couple of the century.
Yo, I ain't gonna lie. This is we're going straight from the other one.
Straight
you know,
into
people
it.
don't know.
We saw you like almost jumping at the edge of your seat off of one question.
Yeah.
You want to start there?
Well, hold on. Let me shout out the food that's not here because we always do it. Tradition-wise, we had HoAloha Hawaiian BBQ. We actually ate all the food, so we're probably going to use the same clips again, maybe. Really but this is part 2, continuation of that. Shout out. Thank you guys again for delicious food.
Yes. Boom.
Let's get it.
So there was a question that was asked about women in ministry. Mm-hmm. And I know, Will, you had some thoughts that you were kind of on the edge of the seat to share.
I don't have to share it.
I would love to. I'd love to, because I'm sure, I would imagine there's probably questions, and if you wanted to, like,
for sure,
inject some thought. Yeah, feel free to inject, man.
Well, just for context, Ben and Kevin were just asking Andrea the question about like women in ministry and what she, how she approaches that conversation. And obviously just being a pastor, being a Bible nerd, my brain was like, and so, I mean, just a few things I thought mentioning is, they say unity in the essentials and charity in the non-essentials, right? So there are close-handed issues and open-handed issues. Yep. The close-handed issues are the things that the church as a universal body agree to, right? The deity of Christ, the humanity of Christ, the Trinity of God, the Father, Son, and Spirit. But there's like second-handed issues, like gifts of the Spirit or woman in ministry. So I think just knowing that, like you shared, Ben, like fellowship with people with non-essential agreements is biblical, because Jesus prays, God, make them one as you and I are one. So unity in diversity, right? But regarding a woman in ministry, obviously, my wife, she doesn't even call herself a pastor. She just happened to find people calling her that. And when we co-planted a church, I just said, let's just start it. And sometimes I forget when you start a church, you're just automatically called a pastor. We just wanted to start a church, right? So first, when it comes to women in ministry, one of the reasons why I actually was a complementarian, where I, in the beginning, didn't believe women could be pastors, or at least senior pastors. And that primarily comes from 1 Timothy 2:12, where it says, I do not permit a woman to teach or have authority over man.
Right.
So I felt like that's pretty straightforward. But then I look at other passages in the Old Testament when Deborah was a judge. She wasn't just a pastor. She was appointed by God to be a judge, which was the highest authority figure before the kingdom was established with Saul, right? So a woman is established to be the senior leader of a nation. And so we see that. And there's other passages throughout scriptures when you see women with titles of authority, like Junia in Romans 16. She's called an apostle. Apostle Paul in Romans 16, he says, greet Junia for me, the apostle. I mean, what's going on over here, right? Phoebe, which in 1 Timothy 3 talks about the qualifications of an elder and deacon. And the Greek, it sounds like he's only addressing men to be elders and deacons. But in the book of Acts, it says Phoebe was a deacon. So those qualifications, if Phoebe was a deacon, it also means that those qualifications for deacons is not just for a man if he calls diakonos, which means servant, deacon, to Phoebe. Lastly, I'm a nerd, bro.
I love it.
Let's get it, bro.
Let's
get it. 1 Timothy 2, the conversation where it says, woman, I do not permit women to be teachers or have authority over men. In that same verse right above that, it says, I don't permit women to braid their hair.
Yep.
I don't permit women to wear jewelry. So the question is this a cultural application or is this a timeless theological application? I was persuaded it is cultural because in Ephesus, where Timothy is pastoring, what people don't know in the context of the first century, that was where Princess Diana, or the goddess cult of Diana, was there.
Yeah.
And that cult, which is actually that temple there in Ephesus in modern days, is Seventh-day Wonder, which is a temple. All the priests were females. And in that cult, they actually taught that women were more superior than men. So the egalitarian perspective is, as the church was being, as people were becoming followers of Christ in Ephesus, that those teachings and that theology of women being superior was pervading the church. And Apostle Paul is specifically talking to a local context that, hey, the women here are teaching something wrong. Right. They're teaching a false theology. Therefore, we permit you, I'm asking you to be quiet and not to teach over the men who've actually been discipled to learn. So that's a huge contextual thing that a lot of people miss unless you understand first century history in Ephesus. And there's so many more things I could talk about. Sure. But I'll just there's Luke 10.
This is what I was
Last two things. Another cultural context that people miss. In Luke 10, this is one of my favorite things, and I learned this from N.T. Wright, where it talks about Mary and Martha, where Mary is sitting at the feet of Jesus, and Martha is in the kitchen serving, and the Bible says that Martha got mad at Mary, right? Says, yo, like, why aren't you helping me in the kitchen? And Jesus says, Martha, Martha, you are anxious about many things, but only one thing is necessary, and Mary has chosen the right thing. People think Martha was mad because she was just ooey gooey looking at Jesus. She was mad at Mary because Mary was sitting where men sit. Women are supposed to be in the kitchen. Men and disciples, the Talmudines, the apprentices, the men sat in the living room to be taught by a rabbi. And the reason why you're taught by a rabbi is so that one day you yourself will become a rabbi. And the fact that Mary was sitting at the feet of Jesus and Jesus commends that, they're breaking all cultural and social norms. Wow. So the reason why Martha was angry was saying, Mary, you can't be sitting there. Like you can't be where the men are. And Jesus is completely flipping upside down a countercultural understanding of a woman leadership, a woman capacity, woman's spiritual giftedness. And later, lasting, when Jesus resurrects from the dead, who is the first people to be his eyewitnesses? Women. Is women. At a time where women weren't even allowed to testify in court. So Jesus chooses specifically women to be the first ones to herald the resurrection and the gospel of Jesus. He tells them, you go tell Peter, you go tell John, emphasizing that I'm commissioning you guys to be messengers of the gospel as well. So now all that to say, there's arguments both ways. But so I am theologically persuaded that women are called to be leaders, not culturally. Because I think as followers of Jesus, the Bible should be the foundation in which we engage stuff. Because sometimes people say, like, oh, the reason why they believe in women in ministry is because that's at cultural times. It's like, no, I'm actually persuaded more so as I read the full narrative of Scripture that Jesus and God in the end times, your sons and daughters shall prophesy, not just your sons, right? So, and there's like 10 more things in the back of my mind but I'm just gonna,
so I definitely, I hear that the Mary Martha thing. I haven't heard that, and I think that take is actually super interesting, and I've never looked at it.
It's also very convincing.
People will hammer me on that.
No, I get it.
That's from N.T. Wright, by the way. He's a New Testament scholar.
And even with that, I know people are still gonna try to tear you apart in that too. So like, it's not about how do we convince like there's this one way of thinking, and and then and I'd love to hear your take on it. Maybe I'm taking this out of a different context also, but like, where, God appointed roles for men and women, right? For when he created man, and then Eve was created from his rib. And like, even when, Adam and Eve sinned, God, though Eve was the first to do it, God asked Adam, like, what'd you do? Right? Like, you're the leader, right? And then, so even in context of men and women, though created equal in terms of their roles, had separate roles, right? And then even in context to marriage, like man is the head of the household. And then if you want to take that into church, like the church is Christ's bride, right? So Christ is the head of the church. So then in that context, it's like, in some sense, Christ is the husband, the church is his bride, and husband leads the church. And so like, I can see how people be like, well, even in that context, like Jesus is the man, he leads the church. the church is his bride. So therefore men are supposed to parallel even that dynamic within the church. I don't know if that's a stretch of an argument, but I've also heard that, you know what I'm saying? So, but again, things to divide over or to decide, right? I've heard that, like, either divide or decide, and that comes to discernment, right? Like what do you feel convicted in the Holy Spirit? And I don't think, and again, my personal stance is not something that I would be like, yeah, I can't fellowship with people who believe that, like, women should, be allowed to teach or don't allowed to teach in church. And I think going back to even like spiritual giftings and things like that, I don't think, and again, I'm not saying that like I firmly stand on anything. If anything, I'll just be like, because I've seen in scripture, and also I've like, maybe it's just because of what I'm used to, and I'm always open to like, yeah, I'm down to, well, I never learned about the Mary Martha thing, and I'm like down to explore what that is and ask God how to like, kind of decipher that. But like, when it comes to, giftings, it's like, yeah, God gifts everybody. Doesn't mean that the roles are the same though. Like, so women can have the gift of teaching, prophecy, all that as much as a man can, but does that mean that the placement of where those things are exercised in terms of roles, are those also the same? That I'm saying, I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, I can't say yes, I can't say no. I just see where it says in scripture. Is that cultural? I can see the argument for the cultural thing. Then I'm just like, I don't know. Yeah. But even my I don't know makes me feel safe to not know. Because it's not like I need to know because my salvation depends on it, because it doesn't.
For sure.
You know what I'm saying? And I think that's where I know people can get very heated, and it's like, yo, but we got to know where we stand. I'm like, not to say you don't need a stance on it. I think having a stance is great and it's important, but it's not this like deciding factor of like, yo, dude, unless you figured this out, you got a problem. For sure. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Speaking of stances, what is the mission statement for your guys' church?
We have a vision statement and a mission statement. Our vision statement is to help people find a home in the loving presence of God by centering their lives on the beloved. Our mission statement is to be a multiplying transformation center. So
what does multiplying transformation mean to you, Andrea?
To me? I think so. When we think of our church, we think of a transformation center because we want people to be transformed. One thing we tell our volunteers in our church is we don't feel called to transform a city per se, but it's to see transformation within our church and to see transformation agents sent out of our church so they'll transform wherever they are. So I think a multiplying transformation center is planting more transformation centers. So just seeing more transformation centers happen. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah. The reason why I asked that is like, we're talking about topics that I love actually what you said, and I'm going to take that forever. I never heard that, Ben, when you said decide or divide.
Yeah, that's good. I was
like, I never heard that.
Hey, you be talking more and more like a pastor. You have all these things.
Where'd you get that?
Alliterations.
And then you said discern.
Discern. The 3 Ds.
I probably heard that from somewhere, man. I can't take credit for it.
This dude's preaching over here, man.
Every time I hang out with Ben, bro, just like his revelation.
I'm like, man, because there's a lot of topics where you could decide, divide, but make sure you have discern. I love that, and that's why I immediately asked about the mission, because as you guys are in a place where it's very unique too. I've never met a co-lead church, co-pastoring a church as a husband and wife team with kids. You're not like single men and women dating. You know what I mean? Like, you guys have a family. That's a lot. And you guys are deciding we're going to put even more on our plate and get this external family and do this amazing thing that's very difficult, right? And you guys have put all this on, and then having a mission statement of transforming and multiplying. These are like big things. But what's beautiful though, and the reason why I bring it all back there is because I want to know because currently your congregation looks like the city you're in, correct? You guys are in Buena Park. As honest as you guys want to be, how does that translate to where you guys are today? Because Buena Park is very dominantly Asian American. Are you guys happy with that? Is that something you guys always wanted? Do you feel like the church needs to continue to multiply, transform in a certain direction? And either one of you guys can answer that.
Well, the way kind of our marriage works too, and even the way we work, is I'm more like the visionary. She's more of like, among the fivefold language, the one that I came on last time and talked about, she's more the prophetic. She's kind of like, she senses like, hey, honey, like this is what I sense the Lord is calling us to do, and this is what I sense we need to go. And the visionary side of me is, all right, let's go, and this is how we're gonna do it. You know, when we work together in that way. With that being said, there's always a tension for me from the here and the there. Right. And I think as any leader, especially if you're wired in the entrepreneurial and apostolic way, where are we now and where will we be tomorrow? And how do we live in that tension without forcing things? I always say there's a difference between forcing things, being intentional, and being complacent. Right. So I believe God's called us to just reach all people. And by all people, I literally mean all people, young people, old people, grandparents, children, but you're in the most organic sense, you're going to reach where you are most likely. Yeah. And you're also you're not a island starting something fresh. You're starting something with a history of people that you've done life with. Yeah. And both of us having been pastors and leaders in immigrant churches for 15 years, that community is going to be drawn to what we're doing. So I have a heart specifically for my people, and I say that with no shame, for Korean Americans. I have a big heart for Korean Americans, but I also have a calling and a heart for all people. So my tension is always, I always tell Andrea, hey, this is where we are. This is who's coming. We're going to love them. But this is where we're going, and we're going to be intentional but not forceful. And the way you're intentional is by building relationships, loving people, caring for people, and having plans without forcing it. So to answer your question is yes and yes. I am happy and so thankful for everyone that's at our church. I am also sad at all the people we haven't yet reached. So it's the tension of being content and hungry to obey what we sense God's called us to do. So if that makes sense. Yeah. And there's a lot more I could say to that. But
I think, you guys are talking about, all of us are talking about just the difference of roles, as well as understanding that like those things mature and they develop over time too. I'm sure there are things that 10 years ago you used to think that was like gospel truth that maybe now you're like, I'm kind of rethinking that, you know what I mean? And I don't think that is a bad thing per se, because it's not like you just decided one day to wake up to like, yeah, I'm going to just change my convictions. You just learn differently, right? Like I mean, we've talked a lot about even things like gifts of the Holy Spirit. Like I was a cessationist when I first got saved, because that was what I was taught. And this part in scripture says that the perfect has come, so the partial is done away with. I'm like, okay, like I'll just take it for face value. And then as we live through our lives, and when we experience God in different ways, it's hard to believe something that like you thought it was interpreted a certain type of way, and then God shows up in your life very clearly in a different type of way. Sure. So then it makes you question like, wait, did I actually understand that correctly? Is God deceiving you? Of course he's not, because what does scripture say? God is not a God of deception. He's very clear. He gives us a sound mind. And so like all of that is like I think our call is to always re-examine as we experience, but always invite God into like, God, what am I actually experiencing here? Because I think it's also dangerous to be like, oh, well, I experienced this, so therefore that's true. Like, because we could also deceive ourselves in even our experiences. We got to discern like, is that actually God, or was that just my emotion? Was that some sort of just weird circumstance? And also the enemy's always trying to deceive us too. And, you know, Bible says that he comes disguised as an angel of light. You know what I mean? So even at that, like we got to be very careful of even things that seem sort of packaged in this Christian, whatever packaging. It's like discern all spirits. That is what we're called to do. So I think I love this conversation because And I don't even think we're at this agree to disagree thing. I think we're just sharing different experiences and different viewpoints. And I'm sure people out there got all kinds of different places too, whether they may agree or disagree or maybe rethink. Yeah. And I think that's what these conversations are for. And I think that's also where I would love for more open conversation, especially in regards to when we discuss our faith, what's true, what is like the stance, what's a primary, secondary issue, and blah, 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 for us to discuss and even like, and have those questions, because I think that's where religiosity can become a temptation of, or maybe not even temptation, maybe like, let's say non-believers, non-Christians will look at Christians of like, oh, y'all just think you got it all figured out.
For sure.
Like, and it's almost this like holier than thou, high and mighty. Oh, y'all got all the answers, and us over here that don't know, I guess the people with questions will be over in this corner while you guys have it all figured out. We're like, no, dude, we don't got it all figured out at all.
Sure.
Like, I think God like calls us to discern, calls us to like rethink. And also he does call us to know what you believe in, though. That's why apologetics and that's a whole other topic. But like, I just think that there needs to be more forum where it's open to have questions and like wrestle with stuff in public. You know what I mean?
I want to share one more thing on this topic because I really do want to get into relationship.
Oh, okay.
Because that's spicy. But I want to get into
Have you guys ever had a husband and wife on the pod yet?
No, I think this is it.
For sure.
Not,
right?
well, we had Benny and Janice, but we were talking
about
this.
True.
We were talking about head.
Yeah, that was a whole other
city.
Yeah, that was a whole other topic, which was great. Yeah.
Before we jump off this topic, because man, I just experienced something new for me where I met this brother through another friend because they said, hey man, this dude loves God and he's doing all this crazy stuff. You got to meet him. He's like, you should meet Kev. And like, I was like, cool. So I meet him over the phone and I'm like following his testimony because you usually just tell each other quick stories of each other to learn about like where you at, and it started getting kind of interesting because his story kept going. He's like, oh yeah, I was lost. And then like, I grew up Christianese, like, using the same words that we use. And I'm like, okay, cool. And he's like a Korean cat. So he has this very similar immigrant journey, all this stuff. And then like, he was like, but his tendency was he couldn't stop doubting everything because he wanted to just know so deeply. He was like a truth seeker, which is great, but he kept going and he kept going. And so yes, he got hurt, but obviously the church hurt is there. I could see it all over his story. And then he started searching on his own, and then he started finding all sorts of things. And so he's like, dude, I have this newfound relationship with Jesus and Buddha and yogis and he's just like, now I just love the universe, right? And I heard it, but the entire time he was sharing his story, I just felt pain. I just felt it. And I was like, usually when someone is wrong, my natural tendency is to correct. That is like just natural. For sure. Because I'm already hearing like red alerts and flags going off. Wait, what? What are you saying? That sounds scary, And I'm already like, and I could almost, like, it doesn't leave my mouth, but it's like there. It's on my neck. I'm like, I'm about to interject. And every time God was like, don't speak, listen, don't speak, listen. For sure. God is literally telling me to keep my mouth shut. So I'm just sitting there and he goes on for 20 minutes about this fantastical spiritual journey of drugs and ayahuasca and all this stuff, how he came back to Jesus through ayahuasca and all these things. But I didn't want to say anything. And finally at the end of that, all I said to him was like, dude, like, thanks for sharing. Can I encourage something though? He's like, I love that you have an answer today, but don't stop searching for God.
Yeah.
Like, why did you park here?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, keep going. Yeah. Because you said you just came back to Jesus. Don't stop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like, in that, I already heard the pain back in his voice, and all he had to say was, after we talked about my journey after that, so I started sharing him my testimony, and he just sat back, man. He's like, dudes, no one's ever not fought me. And I'm like, what do you mean? I was like, because I didn't even catch that happened. And after he was like, you didn't argue. And I'm like, argue what? And I realized it's because I can't argue your life experience.
Totally. Yeah.
And I just sat back in that. And after that call, he literally said before he hung up, dude, I gotta sit and reflect for a while. You got me twisted, dude.
Yeah.
Man, that's so dope. You know, like, what's so cool about that is that, you know, again, going back to the word Christian is little Christ. So we're just supposed to follow what Christ did. Did Jesus ever argue with somebody to have them believe that he was the Son of God? Did he ever argue? He never did. He always just, he even just asked questions. He's just like, who do you say that I am? He didn't proclaim. He had all the authority to do all the flex moves as God, and he didn't. And he waits. And so I think you sort of inviting him by simply listening and validating his experience. And one thing, the difference of validating experience is not saying, dude, you're totally right.
Yeah, for sure.
That's it. It's just like, hey, that's your experience, man. That's legit. Like that, like, thank you for sharing your experience, which I know is true. And then there's an invitation like, hey, keep going, man. You know what I mean? And that is a place where someone, going back to like what you were talking about, good service, of like good being safe. Like you're inviting him to feel safe, that like, it's okay that I have experienced this. It's okay that I'm struggling and I still have questions and I haven't arrived yet. And that's okay. That's welcome. And I believe that's how Jesus would have done it. You know what I mean? Like Jesus would have not been like, let me beat this over your head until you believe it, you know? So I think that's really, really good, man. That's cool. But going back to what you were saying, right? So, you know, we have, you know, married couple. One of the first, I forgot, we had Vincent and Ellen on here too as well. Shout out Vincent.
That was like episode 3, bro.
So we've been a year plus in.
It's just been a long time.
It's been a while.
And I know, so I actually know a little bit more about y'all's story than maybe you even know that I know, because I listened to the episode on Beyond I Do that you guys did. Hey. It was a great episode.
Shout out to Beyond the Letter.
We love y'all.
Adam Mesa. Yes. And I really enjoyed that. And so if y'all are curious about their like dating origin stories, I mean, you guys can touch on it as much as you guys want here. But I guess I have a specific question. I'm just gonna get a little bit personal here too, because
let's do it.
You know, in like, I don't even want to call it the church. I'll just say society. Society has this thing of, you know, when you get to a certain age, you're supposed to get married, you're supposed to have kids, that's just what life is, right? You're supposed to, or it's at least more socially acceptable when you're like, oh, you're at this age, are you married? Do you have kids? And if, depending on your answer to that question, I think it's on the individual where we think like, man, if I don't answer that question with the accepted, you know, like, yes, I am at this age and therefore I'm blah, blah, blah. And I also know that even in the church culture, I feel this, and I think it's changing a little bit more now. And I see churches approaching this more differently, but I think historically and maybe even traditionally in church, you know, the family institution of marriage and children is kind of what's like very encouraged and talked about most often. And then like singleness is not really addressed much. But when we look at statistically, there are probably more singles in churches now, like in the current institutional church, there are probably more single. I don't even want to say I think there are some stats where they show that more people are single, less people are getting married, less people are having kids, the whole thing. And we don't even need to go into the stats of like what that means like on a out of the church context, but let's just keep it within the context of church. What are your guys' thoughts about that? Like, I mean, marriage is a gift. Obviously, Bible is very clear on like, you know, husband, if you find a wife, it's a good thing. And then you also have Paul saying like, hey, if you can be like me, remain as I am. But if you're burning, go get married, you know, and then Jesus was single, you know, so there's a lot of things like both are good, but why is it that, you know, maybe because it is our natural wiring, but like we're, the institution of marriage is so highly, I'll just call it praised. And singleness is kind of like, oh, if you're single, you're cool, you're fine. Like, that's also welcome here. You know what I mean? Like, what are your guys' thoughts on that?
You have thoughts?
Want to start?
I mean, I just think, in my mind, I'm just obviously just giving my live thoughts. I think most people get married, right? They say 9 out of 10 people get married in North America. So just given the fact that 90% of the audience.
Whoa, I didn't even know that. I was like 9 out of 10.
Yeah, that's way more than I thought.
This was a statistic from probably like 10 years ago, though. It might have changed. Okay. But I remember, I don't even remember if I could source this. Someone can fact check me. But if I remember correctly,
Google check us in the comments. Thank you.
If I remember correctly, 9 out of 10 people get married at least once in their lives. So I think just given the fact that majority of people end up getting married, you know, churches, institutions, organizations are going to gear towards the majority population. So if that's the case, I see it that way. I think in the church space, it's probably because they perceive a sense of maturity once you have kids or married, which is not even true though, right? It's just a perception of if you're married, you're mature. Also in the church space, a lot of church denominations, organizations won't let a pastor get ordained unless they're married.
Really?
Yeah, for sure. That's a baseline requirement. Wow. And that comes from 1 Timothy 3, that an elder should be married to one person.
Right, Y'all are like presidents.
So the idea behind that though is one, I think that's not fair, or that's not even biblical, because that means that Apostle Paul and Jesus could not be on your elder board.
Whoa, that's crazy.
Right? So that's the negative. So on the positive side, I think some of that is wisdom for a man not to end up falling into temptation, or for the congregation to feel a sense of like there's a lady or a woman who could minister to the woman.
That's interesting, because how come the Catholic Church is the other way? Like a priest is supposed to be single, right?
Exactly.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So I mean, there's different. That's what I'm saying. There's like, I like to try to give a holistic perspective, like the good sides, the bad sides, the light sides, the shadow sides. So there's a lot of organizations that won't even ordain you or accept you as a church planner unless you're married, because they say there's too much risk, too much temptation, X, Y, and Z, right? But again, I say like the Catholic Church or Jesus and Paul will never be on your church planning team, right? Wow. So I think there's many reasons, bro. I think it's wrong.
Okay.
I think it's wrong.
Yeah. Oh, but that explains a lot though. Yeah. Why it's so couple centric. Right. Interesting.
Like, you think because if that's what the ordination like requirements are, then even on a subconscious level, like you think, well, that's what I gotta aspire to be, because that's what's like sort of accepted even in that space.
Yeah.
Do you guys get hit, or do you, Andrea, get hit with a lot of like questions, like couples come up, like, how do you guys do it, you and Will, and like, you know, things like that? Like, how do those conversations go? Do those conversations come?
Like, how do we do what? Just like
anything, life, date, I was like date, you know, how do you deal with men? You know, like, I don't know, like any of that stuff.
I think people compliment us, like, oh my gosh, you guys, you know, seem like you get along so well, or like, you know, I think a lot of times when people hear our story, they're like, oh my gosh, like he pursued you and blah blah blah, and you guys, you know, it just on the outside seems very like, wow, you guys looks good. But I think we've put so much work into our relationship. We've also been through a lot of ups and downs. We've like, you know, just had to confront a lot of things. And so I think that's the question I get, is like, oh my gosh, like, how do you guys, like, how is marriage? You guys look so good. The compliments are always positive. It's never like, are you guys okay? You know, like, but I think we've put a lot of work into it. So.
I have a personal question.
Yeah.
So I understand you said you would never marry a pastor.
Yeah.
And what made you change that?
What's up, stewards? We just want to take a moment to thank all the amazing supporters of Good Service. Thank you guys so much. We have exciting news today. We officially have a Patreon. If you join the Patreon today as a subscriber, you get exclusive content every single week.
From Q&As, solo reflection rounds, extended episodes, vlogs, and much, much more. You're going to find all of that exclusively on our Patreon. You can log on to patreon.com/goodservicepodcast. Thank y'all so much. God bless y'all. Back to the episode.
Hey.
I'm laughing because when I met him, I already knew he was going to be a pastor. So, just to give the audience context, I swore on my life I would never marry a pastor. I was really fixed on it. But I think what changed my mind was, he told me when he was 18 that he liked me. At that time, I was like, I will never marry a pastor. Not because I think I'm too good for that, but it was because I didn't know if I could be who he like needed in ministry. And because I had grown up in an immigrant church, it was like to be a pastor's wife there's a very like specific image. I think for 2 years we were talking. During those 2 years, I went back and forth a lot. I was like, I was so fixated on like career, so fixated on he's going to be a pastor. I don't want to marry a pastor.
Were you afraid that you would be poor? Is that why?
Be poor. Also just like,
let's just keep it real, man. Fear came true. Let's just jump right to it. What's the real concern here?
I don't think it's honest.
Well, context, Andrea's a pastor's kid.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, honestly, though, it wasn't really about the poor thing. It was just more about, I, at that time, knew I might want to move to China and teach abroad. I might want to be a missionary abroad. I actually didn't want to live in the United States. Like, even when we started dating, I was studying abroad in Cuba. We did, long distance for like 4 months. So I kind of had this idea of like, I don't want to be tied down to a local church. I want to be free to go wherever I want. And then I wanted to get my PhD. So they just had all these things like, because I'm such a planner, I was like, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this. Can I do that with him as a pastor? But during those 2 years where we were just trying to figure out what we are, are we compatible? Do we want to date? For me,
when you were like 18, man, did all those things just make you go, man, I want her more?
100%.
Did you take that as a game? 100%. You thought she was playing the hard to get?
I thought she was playing hard to get. So before I was saved, that's the game, right? You play hard to get. The girl wants you more.
I've already seen it,
give her a crack. Oh my when I got saved, I'm done with that. Like, I'm just going to go for a girl. But she was the Christian one who was doing that to me. And I was like, stop playing with me. Like, do you like me or not?
Wait, hold up. Was that the game? Were you playing the game? No, or was it on a subconscious level maybe?
No, what's funny is I'm sure she wasn't, but I'm sure he thought it was.
For sure I did.
But I mean, you were the one.
Yeah, because you project, right? Because I thought she was doing what I was doing.
You're projecting the game on her,
Hold
on.
I have to ask now directly to Andrea, who's sitting right here. Let's not just assume what she was doing. Let's ask her, what were you doing?
It was not a game. I think for me at first, for the first year, I was genuinely like, he's crazy. Like, he's actually crazy. What I mean by crazy is, back then, honey, you were a little crazy. Like, he was kind of all over the place. Like, just
off the streets, just radically saved.
Got it. So just a lot of energy, overly zealous and things like that. Yeah,
kind of like untamable. Like, I was like, I don't know if you're ready for a relationship. But the second year, I was really hung up on.
Wait, what's the age gap?
Same age, right?
We're same age.
Same age.
Yeah,
okay.
But we were talking, like, before we started dating, we were trying to figure out for 2 years, should we even date? But that second year, I was really couldn't let go of that he's a pastor, because I just didn't know what that would look like, because I just know him. Like, he's going to be a pastor. But I always joke he, like, inceptioned himself into my life. Because every time we stopped talking and we're like, okay, let's just be friends, like, or let's not even be friends, just for, whatever, like, stop talking, I would be like, I kind of miss him.
Hold on.
And I'm like,
that sounds like a game here.
Yeah.
That wasn't a game for me.
Okay.
I was just pissed.
Okay. So you were just over it. You're like, all right, this is too much.
We genuinely were like, we're not friends anymore. We're like done, like just done. But then I would be like, I kind of miss him, but then I had too much pride to reach out. But then we would see each other and just in our friend group and start talking. And that happened a couple of times. Finally, one of my friends confronted me and she was like, okay, what are you guys? This is getting ridiculous. Like, this is so confusing. And she's like, Andrea, do you marry someone for what they're going to be or because you love them? Like, why are you so fixated on that he's going to be a pastor? Like, do you like him? Do you enjoy his, your friendship with him? Like, do you like him? And I was like, I do, but I just don't like I was so hung up on that.
Who is this good friend?
Yeah. Who is this good? I mean, you don't need to out names, but
shout out to Yuri.
Yes.
Okay. Now she goes by Faith.
Yeah.
Shout out to Faith.
But she was kind of in my face. She's like, you need to figure this out and you need to be real about, like, how do you actually feel about him? Not just about why are you so obsessed with this, like, what he's going to be. That really made me stop and think, do I like him? You know, like why am I so fixated on this?
I'll say this though, as a husband now been together and interpreting that season, I feel like different people have different needs, like at a deeper level. Once you go past the superficial infatuation level, there's that wall you hit at that point of really making a commitment. And hers was, I need to feel safe. Is I don't know if I feel safe with you. Meaning, I don't know if we're going to be broke or poor or rich or whatever. I don't know if my life is going to be chaotic and crazy. Your personality is wild.
Like, I don't know if I have to cater to what is going to, the chaos that's going to happen here.
Am I going to have to let go of my dreams, my ambitions, and my calling? And I remember, I don't know if you remember, she had this moment where she told me, I finally feel safe around you. Not as in like I was unsafe, but that she was able to be like, I trust him.
That was before you guys dated, or was
the moment we started dating, it was we're getting married because we've been pursuing each other. I've been pursuing her for 2.5 years. You guys got married
fast.
I tried to get married ASAP when I was like 21. I'm not even playing. Her father was like, hell no. He was like, so her dad's a pastor who was also my spiritual father, who I got saved under. He told me, and it's very old school. There's a lot of history behind this too, by the way. The way we started dating, my wife, coming from a collective culture, right? She really, and being the oldest and the daughter, she really has a hard time making decisions that her parents don't approve of. It's both a blessing and a struggle, right? Yeah. So her parents were against it too, like vehemently against it. I was cool as a disciple, but not as a future father, a son-in-law, because he knows my testimony. The day we started dating, bro, this is how crazy this is. He calls me and says, tomorrow's Christmas. We're having a meeting at my mom's house, his mom. I want to introduce you to my mom. We weren't dating yet. We were still figuring this out. Okay. He's like, bring some fruit. That's how he talks to me. So I'm going to her house, her grandma's house. I show up. Right when I ring the doorbell, he grabs my arm, grabs her arm. He says, get down on your knees. Zero exaggeration. Yo, he says, Amma, which means mom. He grabs his mom, her grandma. She's in heaven now. He makes us get on our knees. He puts his hands on both of our heads, has his mom lay hands on us, prays over us, and says, you guys are together now. What? Stands up and walks away. I was so pissed off. I didn't know what to feel about this. And I look at Andrea. Andrea's face is like bright red. Yeah. And he just believes in courtship. He's an old school guy. He's like, this is my girl and I choose who she's going to be with. And for 2.5 years, one of the main reasons why she also rejected me wasn't just her own. It was her mom, her cousins, her dad were all like, he's crazy. Yeah. Like, we know his story. Like, there's not enough history to know if he's going to still like follow Christ or he's going to be one of those, you know, those stories.
He was so radical, like Jesus shirt, like, just
and you didn't come from that before.
Yeah, so I was on flames. Right. Like, so I was witnessing to everybody, anyone, everyone, everywhere, anytime, any place, because it was so new. So that was a part of it, bro.
Yeah.
So how did you feel when your dad just like, now y'all are together and
the audience,
the courtship was official?
99% of the audience was like, okay, what just happened? Yeah. There's 1% that can relate to this. They don't exist.
I don't even know what that is. So how did you receive that?
I was so shocked. I mean, I think he did that because I told them at a certain point after I told him, I was like, okay, I think I do like you. I do want to be in a relationship with you. And then he's like, it's about time, girl, and that's how he talks. But then the next step was for me to tell my parents. Then when I told my parents, I could tell they were like, oh, like,
she
what do
really
we
likes
do?
him.
Yeah, she like actually likes him. Yeah. I think my dad was like, if we can't beat them, gotta join them. So he took matters into his own hands.
Let me even make this story even crazier. And they're great in-laws. Love them to death. But now we're dating for 3.5 years by this point because her dad, who's a very strong alpha male figure, says you can't marry my daughter until you get your master's degree.
Okay.
Very Asian of him, but specifically my seminary degree.
Yeah.
So I took extra units. My last semester, I went to go propose and they said no.
Yeah.
They said no. They're like, we're not ready. It's too sudden. You're asking too fast.
Yeah.
That was the one time we almost broke up. Yeah. I was like, I'm done with this.
Were you frustrated?
I was heartbroken
because of her parents.
Yeah, of course.
And not anything between you guys. It was just
not
like, man, your parents
us,
are
but
too
that
difficult.
bleeds in.
Yeah,
right?
totally.
So that bleeds in. So like I remember
for the parents listening in, don't Don't do any of that to your children.
So I remember I brought the wedding ring. That was how I was gonna ask. I was like, hey, like I want to show you something. I showed it to them, and I learned a lot from that. We had deeper conversations, understanding family dynamics, different contexts, and she's a Korean American immigrant. I'm a third culture kid, grew up at a U.S. military base.
Your parents got married super young.
My parents got married when they were like 21 and 24 and 23 or something like that. And my brother got married when he was 20. He got married in college. Yeah. So they were like, hurry up and get married. So what you were saying earlier, I was ready to go.
Yep.
Her family was like, chill.
I was the glue, and I am the glue of our family. So for me to like branch out and be in a relationship and get married and say like I'm starting my own family, I think was a huge shock to them.
For your mom and dad.
My mom and dad. Because I'm literally like the...
And there's so much even like talking into marriage, like nuances of how unique every marriage and every relationship is, and how you're not just marrying an individual, you're marrying into their family, and you're marrying into the social cultural dynamics of that nucleus to your own nucleus, and how are we going to work this through. And I think one of the things that played to our advantage that people didn't know what at once was an extreme struggle was all the fighting in the beginning. All the heart turmoil of like, does this girl like me? Does she not like me? Are you for me? Are you not for me? And at that time, like 3 other dudes were like hollering at her. And I was just like ready to kill somebody. I was like, yo, this ain't happening, And then we start dating, but then I try to propose, that gets rejected. So fight after fight after fight, talks after talks after talks. Like, I mean, she shared this last week's episode, like communication and reinventing yourself and evolving. And I think the thing that has took us to the next level to be able to work together is we've both got very familiar with our own traumas, which has allowed us to be gracious towards the other person's trauma. Because you bring everything from your past into this relationship, and eventually that surfaces. And if you're not aware of how your past affects your present, you're not going to know how to articulate your needs to your partner. And you're not going to even know how to articulate what's happening to you. So I think both of us have gone through mental breakdowns and seeing each other go through that, it's almost like the tragic thing has propelled us to even get even more to get better at communicating our needs, our limitations, working together, raising kids together, being married together. But
that last part you said is so important, because that's something that took me and my wife a really long time to understand is trauma. That we just thought trauma was just a larger pain that you just deal with for the rest of your life. And you would just treat it like as if it was something that bothered you, but you treat it the same way, right? But what little did I know is that trauma, you have to deal with it like with extra care, and you have to, once you decide to deal with it, you got to go deep in it. And you really got to root that out from the roots of it. And I didn't even know that until, so me and my wife do couples counseling still regularly once a month. And we do this even if we're good or not. It doesn't matter, because it's been good for a while, but we just haven't stopped. Because even this last session, my wife identified a trauma of trust that was broken between me and her that is 17 years old.
Wow.
So that's some old stuff. And I knew it bothered her, but I didn't know it was that traumatic to her. And it was actually the first time we broke up when we were in college. It's still there. It was still so packed deep that all it was doing over 17 years was just piling on top of that trauma. And
that's real, bro.
And it was this crazy moment of release, doing like an exercise with the therapist of allowing herself to show her 17-year-old self that there is safety and love for her now. And it was so crazy. And the amount of tears that came from that was like 48 hours of just like grieving that process. It was like, it was crazy. And I didn't think we would do it, but we got there and we worked that out. And even from like the fact that we were able to do that, made me realize like, man, there's still so much work that we need to do. But we also share, for some reason, your guys' story, I do identify, me personally, I identify with. Not a lot of listeners will, because nowadays most people date a little later. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Me and my wife also got married really young. I was 21, she was 20. So
you got married super
really young, because we started dating at 16.
Wow.
So because of that, there's like lots of compacted stuff in there. And so I always joke, because you said something beautiful earlier, and I was like, I'm going to show that to my wife. Because she said, you said something beautiful, like you guys got to grow together and like be in this place now, right? But like what I always say is like, because everyone always compliments us too. And they're like, oh, look at this couple. You guys have been together forever, yada, 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 you know? But as they do that, I always go, yes, we've journeyed here together and has been great. But I'm also her toxic boyfriend. I'm also her toxic husband.
Wow.
I'm also those, like every like ex that you've hated and have trauma over, I'm that same person for her.
Wow.
And I have to know that.
Yeah.
Which sucks.
Yeah.
But I live with it, not to like be a martyr of my own defects, but more of just, hey, you know, this is real. Relationships are so hard.
Yeah.
But you just work through it. And so I appreciate where you shared that, because that is so real. And because of that, that's where you guys are at today, you know?
You know, I wonder with that question. So we're talking about toxic relationships. It's different when you're married, right?
Yeah.
It's not like break up. It's not that easy, right? And so there's a covenant relationship there that, you know, you are trying to, the core of your being, to honor that. Though toxicity is real and trauma can be a lifetime, you know? I think there is trauma that can be worked through, that you can heal from. And I think there's also trauma that you'll always, for the rest of your life, just have to like know how to navigate around the trauma.
Yeah.
It doesn't go away.
Like regulate it.
Right.
Yeah.
And you said something earlier about, and both of you guys are talking about, like, there was this thing about her feeling safe with you. And I get that. Like, safety is everything. Like, if I don't feel safe, and you can't force safety, you can't convince someone to feel safe. It's not like some slick, you know, like I said this magic thing that unlocks safety now.
Yeah.
It's just a feeling. So I guess my two-parter question is, one, what was it for you that made you feel safe? Like, what was it that you're like, you know what, now I feel safe with him? Like, what was it? Was it something that happened? Was it just a matter of time? And one day you're just like, hey, I think I feel safe. Like, was there a defining moment where you felt like this sort of like allowed that safety to be present? And then I guess the two-parter is for both of y'all, having been together for that long, I mean, even yourself, like having been together with your wife that long, when you guys come to these places of like, man, those traumas are still there, because, you know, people break up over the trauma things, like, oh, we just can't get past this. We just aren't compatible. We shouldn't be together. So that's kind of easier to do when you're not married. But then how do you navigate that as a married couple, knowing that trauma can be forever?
Yeah.
Yeah. So part one, the safety thing, like, was there something that kind of helped you get there? And two, how do you guys navigate through the traumas that are still there?
Yeah. I could answer that pretty well. I mean, it's still what he still does for me. But I grew up in a very chaotic home. A lot of eggshells, a lot of instability. I was in 4 different elementary schools by the time I was in 5th grade. I just had no consistency in my life. And I didn't realize how deeply that impacted me until recently, actually. But when we first started talking, I think my inner child was like, I don't know if I'll be safe. Like, you know, you're going to have to give up your voice, your needs to, you know, be a pastor's wife he didn't even know what a pastor's wife is. He's like, I don't even know what you're talking about right now. Like, what do you think I'm expecting?
I was like, what are you talking about? Like, what's the pastor's wife? That's hamonim. I was like, what's this hamonim? I don't even know what that means.
Yeah,
yeah.
You don't know what that avatar is, right? Like, what does that mean?
We're always the dumbest next to our wives.
He didn't grow up in church, so he's like, I don't even know. He's coming to someone with church hurt. Like, he's like, I don't even know what you're talking about. But there was just so much instability in my home, and I've seen my mom work really hard to make ends meet for our family. My dad loves us, but he was just very absent because of ministry. So that's the picture I had of what it means to be a family in ministry. So I think there was that. I was clinging onto my plans for my security. Like, I want to get my PhD. I want to do this. I want to be free to do what I want. But the funny thing about William is, like, he's so oddly like my dad. And I love my dad, but there's just a lot of things that I was affected by because of my dad. He's like so similar to my dad, but at the same time, it's like crazy how all the things that I needed healing from, he embodies. And let me give you an example. It's like growing up, I think I had a very hard time fathoming what unconditional love is. There was just a lot of like criticism, not just in my immediate family, but just in our extended family, just critical voices. So I had a very hard time understanding that what unconditional love is. In the 2 years we were talking, I would be like, I don't know what I want. Like, let's just end it. Let's forget about this. Like, I don't want to waste your time. I'm just wasting your time. I'm not worth your time because I don't know what I want. He would get very frustrated, like, girl, like, I know what I want. And I would feel so bad and kind of triggered, right? Because like, it's like just kind of that like tenseness. But then the next day he'd show up and he'd be like, I like you, girl. Like, and I can genuinely say that to this day, after being 16 years with him, he is so unconditional. I'm not saying he's perfect. I'm not saying that he does everything perfectly, but God just knows what kind of person I needed in my life to say, hey, I'm not going to leave your side. Like, I don't care how messy you look. Sorry, I'm getting emotional. Like, I don't care how like hard things get. I'm not going to leave your side. And I think that was my fear growing up, is like, people are going to leave because people have left. And to this day, I think that's one of the strongest attributes he has. Like, it's not even in our marriage, but it's like in any friendship, in any community he's leading, anytime he's been a pastor, like, I feel like anyone would say that he is not going to leave. He's not going to give up on you. And for me, like, he's just been that person. And so I think that's what brought safety to me, is those 2 years is like, I don't know what I want, like, or, just so many reasons to kind of say, hey, you're crazy, girl. Like, like, you're really crazy. But he just continued to show me through his words, through his actions, through him sometimes not saying anything, just showing up and saying, I'm not going anywhere. I think that brought so much safety. And my inner child, my trauma was like, you can trust him. You can trust that whatever decisions he's going to make, you could follow his leadership. And that's how I feel now. It's like, he's changed and evolved, but he hasn't changed, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
like
totally.
At the core, he's still that person that I fell in love with, like, so early on, And so I think that's like what brought safety to me, is, that he's not flipping a switch and changing all of a sudden, but he's been true to who he is, and that hasn't changed. And so, yeah.
Wow.
Feels good hearing that, bro. Just never tells me that when we're alone.
That's the real reason why we're here.
Yeah.
We're trying to fluff Will up. No.
I'll share. I know we're running out of time, but I would share to Ben's question. And this is something I'm observing as we're getting older and as we've been together longer. I've realized, like, our trauma affects us with like an ebb and flow. As in, like, there are seasons where it's kind of dormant. Like, you're working, things are good, things aren't crazy, things are fine. And all of a sudden, something just happens and you kind of spiral for a season. Like, there, even in the Bible, talks about like a wilderness season or a desert season or like a breakthrough season. And I've realized I've had to notice, she's going through a season right now. And I need to be extra attentive to her needs. I'm about to get emotional too. I need to be more attuned to what I see happening. And I have to fight for her and for us more this season than ever. Just like a business, there's entrepreneurial season when you're getting it kickstarted. There's a season, a lot more energy is gonna go towards that way. And I've noticed for both of us, and there was a season where I had my trauma just came to the front scenes. And usually the trauma comes to the front when you push yourself beyond your limits. And all of a sudden your body's like, stop. Yeah. Like a spaceship that's shaking as it's piercing through gravity. And that's what she's going through right now. And I've been watching like, oh shoot, like this is interesting. Like this used to not bother her, but this is really bothering her right now. What's going on? She's not a bad person. She's hurting. Like what can I do? And she did that for me. Yeah. So I feel like the goal, like you said, is not for the trauma to be gone, but to be sensitive to when it peaks its head and knowing like, okay, like this person needs special attention right now in a way that I can love. I'll share one last story. It's a children's book called There's No Such Thing as a Dragon. It's an amazing children's book. I read it at like an executive leader's private retreat. Wow. And all these pastors and executives were like bawling their eyes out. And the book literally, the leader goes up and said, we're going to read a children's book today. We're like, what type of cult is this? And the book starts with the little kid wakes up and there's a little dragon in his bed. And he goes like, Mom, Dad, like there's a dragon. And then Mom and Dad's like, there's no such thing as a dragon. And then next page, the dragon is a little bigger now. And it's in the living room running around. And it's like, Mom, Dad, look at the dragon. There's no such thing as a dragon. The next page is even bigger on the table of the dining table of the family eating breakfast. Is Mom, Dad, there's no such thing as a dragon. And finally at the way in, it gets huge. Head sticking out the door, tail sticking out the window, and is running around. And then finally the parent notices it. Oh my gosh, there's a dragon. And the last page after that, the dragon like turns back into a baby dragon. And the kid says, I wonder why the dragon got so big. And then the parents said, maybe he just wanted to be seen. Crazy. So don't cry. Don't cry. And the whole premise of the story is we all just want to be seen. And all our trauma is saying is like, I'm hurt. Like me raising my voice is not trying to be alpha male. It's I'm in pain and no one hears me. So wow, or my wife crying in the corner is not because she's emotional. It's like she's actually in pain. And that little dragon, once it feels safe, it comes back. So I think that I remember reading that story and I was bawling. And then the premise of that session with that leader was, isn't that why we all are trying to build big churches? Isn't that why we're all trying to build successful businesses? Because deep down we're all insecure. And if we were just seen, how safe will we feel? And I think the journey of life, but the journey of our marriage is like, I see you and I love you. And that's we're good. There's nothing else you need to prove to me or I need to prove to you. I see all that and and let's get through this. So I think the trauma as you're talking about, it's just being gracious. Like in the past when I used to see people with issues, I'm like, yo, they got issues. Now I'm like, man, they're hurting. They're hurting. Wow. And no one was there to love, you know?
I see you and love you, bro.
But and that story crazy though, huh?
I love that book. I'm gonna look for that book now. I'm totally gonna read it to my children. But I know we're going a little long, so I'm gonna speed through this part. Just one thing I wanted to just add to the amazing stories that you guys just shared is that I mentioned therapy. And so I'm not a professional or anything. I learned this from my therapist. I'm not going to teach exactly what she did, but what I will say is through the work that she did and so many professionals that have the skills to do so. And if you guys have insurance or whoever's out there, you know, like if you guys have the ability to get some help, please do. And the reason why is like the stigma of like doing it on your own and, you know, all that stuff. There's so much stigma behind therapy. People are more open to it now more than ever. But what's great about working on trauma, even as a preventative, what's powerful is that everything could be okay, but we went through that initial, like for example, I'm just gonna use my wife's 17-year-old trauma thing that we just went through. The reason why that even came up had nothing to do with that, with anything was wrong. Like we're actually having great weeks. Like we've been like connecting and bonding and whatever. But I just noticed a small thing in our marriage that I was like, you know, this thing hasn't changed much. And I noticed it. And it's kind of like having a dull spot in the carpet or something. Like you just like notice there's something little off, you know? But I didn't want to poke and prod at myself, but I encouraged her, if you're open, do you want to like take a moment and share about that thing? And so she did. And so like, and for me, I learned how to do that because my therapist caught something that I was saying in the early sessions where she was like, hey, can we work on that little thing? And I'm like, what little thing? But it was this massive thing. Wow. And so before it flared up again, because what happens is when the trauma still lives inside of you, you go, like you said, it becomes this like volatile outburst all of a sudden. It does do that because you'll have these like these spiky moments in your life. But when you preemptively work on these things and learn the practice of how to work on it early, there are certain traumas today that I still have forever that don't spike like they used to. For
sure.
Yeah,
so now it just, instead of spiking, it's just like a, okay.
Yeah.
I breathe through the up and I'm like, all right. Yeah. And then it keeps me, I have less and less up and down life.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. So just wanted to mention that.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, that's great. I mean, even when you talk about that dragon analogy, it's not like the dragon disappears. It just becomes smaller. It's still there.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And then when you ignore it, it gets bigger and bigger. So it's always going to be there. That's so good. I'm going to I know we got to get you guys out of here. If y'all don't mind, I'm going to call you guys on your drive home because I have some specifics I want to ask. So I'm over here bursting at the seams right now with some, but that I'll keep that private offline. But
that's offline conversation.
Yeah, offline.
Yeah, that's good.
But in the spirit of good service, and again, this is a kind of a unique episode, and y'all have given your own personal definitions of what good service is. But in the context as a married couple, what does good service look like to you guys as a married couple, as partners in vocation, ministry, and all that? So what does good service look like to y'all in that context?
Mine's always been the same. In measure, I seek her joy above mine. And if I could seek her joy above mine, usually things work out. Yeah. That's good service in marriage.
Yeah. I was going to say similar, like yours sounds better, but I was going to say outserving one another. I think once he starts just showing me that, hey, I'm here, like, you know, once he starts cleaning up the house, I'm like, oh, he cares about me. So I'm going to now, you know, you reap what you sow. And so I feel like the more we serve each other,
you guys are so cute, man. I just think about that, you know, that story with the comb and the mirror and people cutting their hairs, and you know what I'm talking. She cut her hair to buy. You remember this story?
What is this?
No, I won't go into it. It's like a whole thing.
Is this another children's book?
It's a story. Anyways, no. Talk about it later.
Okay, cool. Hey, well, thank you guys so much for coming on and spending some time with us. Thank you for the drive, and I know you got the kids and stuff like that, but I appreciate y'all. Personally, man, we love you guys. We appreciate your support and just everything that we've even been talking about offline, and we just know that this is a relationship that we know that God has ordained, we want to nurture and show as much love and appreciation back to y'all as much as you guys are giving to us. So thank you guys so much. Guys, we'll plug all their information in the show notes with their socials and all that. So thank you so much for tuning into another episode of Good Service. We'll catch you guys on the next one. We out of here. Peace. Thank you for listening to this episode. Make sure you like, follow, and subscribe, and leave us that 5-star rating. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Good Service Pod, and on YouTube at Good Service Podcast.
Thank you. Peace.